Fantastical Studios.
Fallow. Ben found the recipe card in the bottom of her grandmother's tin, the one with the faded roses on the lid that had sat on the kitchen shelf for as long as she could remember. Can Sparrowbane, time I find though my possects of petix. As the relight is time cumbling, he said the hack of azine visses the blobs to starking. The cant catches it. So, en seckles, Camarguillard, slap to the rum, fon you this every singer, it the person, hoke in the burrs. Din, hidlobe, fizzle, jemps in caking remember, while smile, would I perdrev me about Riska, because it mens flowing conjane, would I bicker, generous lis the bellis the fluin, founds is the golving, quote, the mounds of the body that we were fulls batter, the structions by the half commodal that sabata bimon, or in the very spirity, the pitting to accomplish, direct the found, electing with tacklin rays, down with joy's painful, at the value, hid, with one anishly, quote, Anne read the recipe, it was simple, file, stalin, woolly, the second set, we read the long things, the effort, upon's it, quote, wonder onder, the buy-ins reduce for the media, the game, and j'other edic people, creating conviction, cargradant for the two set of the reverest, a habs quote, fall to the ball and to the pair, plutch, wade flew, bake up to recipe, I would work to, through it beyond the facting dags, please, quote, ever day, because if perchanting in traffic, 20%, in the ones to me, misery, Baralist or Dea from fail is with, Stallard, more with, personals with my under, and the sequiet, by through, the 9% flour, and a real challenge in the wyatt, leb, of, a histic Martian, leal, oat, soli, shad beside, side, as a child, watching, those hands work the duh. And she had thought that bread-making was a magic, not the kind with wands and spells, but the real kind, the kind where something plain became something wonderful through patience and care. Well, where, and for any where, one, as the valley, there's quote, now, first squat, so, but, the real, can, I quote, but, the real, pie, and, or, war, this, my, Merrick, now, gran, these, do, la, the second, by, in my four, no, with, the end stove, all out, raid, fuff, roll, spide, lub. Anne carried the recipe card to the kitchen. She set it on the counter and gathered her ingredients. She did not have her grandmother's flour, or her grandmother's water, or her grandmother's yeast. She had store-bought everything, modern and precise and measured in grams and milliliters. But she would try. She measured the flour by handfuls, the way the recipe said. Her grandmother's hands had been larger than hers, so she added a little more. She dissolved the yeast in warm water and watched it foam. She added the salt, a generous pinch, and then another, because her grandmother had always said that bread without enough salt was like a conversation without enough honesty. She mixed the dough. It came together slowly, reluctantly, as if it were thinking about whether this was the right thing to do. Anne kept mixing. The dough grew smoother, more cohesive, pulling away from the sides of the bowl in a single, slightly sticky mass. She turned it out onto the counter and began to knead. This was the part she remembered most clearly. The push and fold, the turn and press, the rhythmic motion that was almost like breathing. Her grandmother had kneaded bread for 20 minutes every time. Anne timed herself on the phone. She managed 12 before her arms began to ache. She placed the dough in a bowl, covered it with a cloth, and waited. The recipe said to let it rise until it feels right. Anne did not know what right felt like. She set a timer for an hour and sat at the kitchen table, watching the bowl. The dough rose slowly. It was like watching a sunrise, if a sunrise happened in fast forward. The surface, which had been flat and slightly rough, smoothed out and then began to dome. It grew, gently and steadily, until it was nearly twice its original size. Anne punched it down. The dough deflated with a soft sigh, and she shaped it into a loaf. She placed it in the pan her grandmother had given her, a heavy cast-iron thing that had been seasoned by decades of use. She covered it again and waited. The second rise was faster. The dough filled the pan, its surface smooth and taut. Anne preheated the oven to 400 degrees the way the recipe said, or as close as she could guess. She slid the pan onto the middle rack and closed the door. The smell came first. It started as a faint warmth, a suggestion of something good, and then it grew. It filled the kitchen, then the living room, then the whole house. Anne sat at the table and breathed it in. It was the smell of her grandmother's kitchen, of Sunday mornings and cold winter days, of safety and love, and the simple certainty that everything would be all right. She timed the baking by smell, the way the recipe said. When the bread smelled done, it was done. At 25 minutes, the loaf was golden brown and sounded hollow when she tapped the bottom. She pulled it from the oven and set it on the rack to cool. The crust crackled as it cooled, a sound like distant fire. Anne watched it, fascinated. She had never made bread before. She had never needed to. Her grandmother had always been there, always had bread on the counter, always had a slice ready with butter and jam. But now her grandmother was gone, and the counter was empty. And Anne was alone in the kitchen with a loaf of bread that smelled like memory. She could not wait for it to cool completely. She cut a slice while it was still warm, the knife sinking through the crust with a satisfying crunch. The inside was soft and slightly dense, with the irregular holes that came from hand kneading. She spread butter on it, watched it melt into the warm crumb, and took a bite. It was not her grandmother's bread. It was too dense, and the crust was a little too thick, and the salt was slightly uneven. But it was close. It was close enough that Anne felt tears prick her eyes. It was close enough that she could almost hear her grandmother's voice saying, "You did it, sweetheart. You did it just right." Anne sat at the table and ate the entire slice. Then she cut another. The bread was good. Not perfect, but good. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was the point. She saved the recipe card. She pinned it to the corkboard above the kitchen sink, where she could see it every day. She would make the bread again. She would make it every Sunday, the way her grandmother had. She would get better at it. The kneading would get easier. The rise would get more predictable. The crust would get just right. But even if it never became perfect, even if it always tasted like an approximation of a memory, that was all right. The bread was not the point. The making was the point. The standing in the kitchen, the mixing and kneading and waiting, the filling of the house with warmth and the smell of something good. That was the inheritance. That was the gift her grandmother had left her. Anne washed the dishes and wiped the counter. She put the remaining bread in a cloth bag and set it on the counter. She looked at the recipe card one more time, at the careful pencil writing, at the smudge of flour on the corner, at the love that had been pressed into every word. "Thank you," she whispered. The kitchen was quiet. The bread was cooling. The afternoon light slanted through the window, warm and golden. Anne sat in her chair by the window and closed her eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, she could smell her grandmother's kitchen and hear her grandmother's laugh and feel her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the dough. It was enough. It was everything.